Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast is your one-stop shop for fantasy football news and advice. Can't decide on who to draft on the first round? Going gaga on how to line up your team. Got you covered. Traditional league, dynasty league, PPR league, IDP league, even daily fantasy football league. Join us as we break down all the questions of fantasy football. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast.
And welcome to the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Jeff Malinoff. I am back, and with me is the Shaquille O'Neal to my Kobe Bryant, the Scottie Pippen to my Michael Jordan. I have with me Marc Souza. How's it going,
brains
buddy?
of the operation.
Sure, you can go with that.
I'm good, man.
The
I'm
Doc
good.
Brown to my Marty McFly.
I'm good. I had 4 fantasy teams this week in my season long. I was crushed by bye weeks in most of them. It looks like I'm going to go 2-2, and I'm very happy with going 2-2 after looking like I would lose all 4 of my matchups. So I'm good, man. How was your week in fantasy football?
Well, in my daily fantasy world, I did pretty good. I won money in my daily fantasy.
How much?
$6.
Woo!
That's a lot when it's like
That's like a burrito.
Yeah. Well, it's another.
Especially if it's like the taco
It
truck.
gives me more money to bet for another daily fantasy. And
Yeah.
before we start, I have to thank Adrian Peterson for that, mainly because of him.
Thanks, Adrian, for getting me a free burrito.
Yeah.
So, a lot to talk about in fantasy football. Like I mentioned, being in 4 different leagues season long, usually Monday nights, I'm one of those guys that somehow, some way, my matchups end up coming into a sweat on a Monday night football game. In every one of my leagues, I am the guy who's most likely to have a game decided on Monday Night Football when most of the league's matchups are already decided. I can rest assured tonight, Jeff, as I have no games that are in the balance for tonight. In fact, if I get a big output from New England's defense, which is entirely possible as they play the Buffalo Bills, who are very forgiving to opposing defenses, then I might be able to sneak a third out of fourth win. So let's start off with the studs. We'll do studs in the first segment. Then we'll do duds in the second segment. We'll talk about the analysis on both of these different topics, on these players, who stood out, and where did they go from here. We'll talk about the duds in the same light. Segment 3 is important, so stick around for segment 3 for waiver wire ads. We have some big waiver wire ads this week, some standout performers that are definitely on your waivers. We'll do that. We'll talk about those players. In segment 4, we're going to talk about injury news that will affect your fantasy football teams. We will also talk about a possible coaching change in Cleveland that could change the outlook for some Cleveland Browns offensive football players. So, Jeff, let's start off with the studs for the week. We'll start off at quarterback. Do you have a stud, or do you want me to name off the top 5 scoring quarterbacks of the week?
Well, I do have a stud at the running back position, but
Let's start quarterback. We'll go all the way down.
Well, that's what I was going to say. You want to name me those quarterbacks?
All right, so here's your top 5. You ready?
Yeah.
Deshaun Watson, 40.8. Patrick Mahomes, 33.9. Derek Carr, 33.6. Jared Goff, 32.5.
Jared Goff was my stud of the week.
Cam Newton, 31.8. So that's your top 5 for fantasy quarterbacks. Definitely a good quarterback week in fantasy football.
To be completely honest, I already had Jared Goff as my stud, but I just want to see where he was ranked in my the top 5.
He had a good game.
He had a very good game. I mean, 295 yards and 3 touchdowns, no interceptions really shows. Yes, 19 of 35 is not very good, but he outpassed Aaron Rodgers.
Yeah, Aaron Rodgers, he actually is on he's on maybe a list in segment 2 today, but yes, you're right. Jared Goff won that duel in terms of fantasy. and in real life.
When someone has 3 touchdowns and no interceptions and almost 300 yards passing, that's impressive. So that was my stud, from the beginning.
Mm-hmm. Cool. I want to talk about Derek Carr. You know his team loses, but they put up 28 points. He had 3 touchdowns.
Was he crying again? Get it?
Oh, God. So, 21 of 28, 244, 3 touchdowns. So, it's weird. And they trade Amari Cooper. The Colts have been playing defense better. So, 244 and 3 touchdowns. He now faces a San Francisco 49ers team in his next game. This is his second big game of the season. He had 39.5 against Cleveland, as I bet you recall in that game where he had 4 touchdown passes. But his second game over 30 following a game where he had under 5 fantasy points. So definitely a big game for him. I'm sure his usage will be higher this week, as in ESPN fantasy leagues, he's only 15% owned. I would expect that number to go at least to 30-35 as the Raiders play the 49ers this week, a defense that gives up a lot of points, a lot of yards. So
that's going to be the game of the week on Thursday.
Right.
I can't say that seriously.
Maybe you can convince yourself to watch this game by, having some something on the line there, so you might start Derek Carr. So, do you ever do that, Jeff, by the way? Do you ever play... Okay, so get this. Sometimes I'll play if I'm trying to add a player from the waiver wire. Mm-hmm. Sometimes if I can't decide who to pick, I'll just pick the one that'll make the game more interesting. Like if it's like the Sunday night football game, so it's like, okay, well this game might not be that fun. Like if I needed 5 points from LaShawn McCoy, I'd probably be way more interested in tonight's terrible Monday Night Football matchup.
Oh, I think everyone's done that. I think that's a very common thing. No doubt about it.
All right, cool. So Mahomes, let's talk about him, Jeff. 33.9 fantasy points. Of course, he's on everybody's fantasy team. He's the number 1 quarterback in the NFL for fantasy football. He's still number 1. A big game. It didn't even feel like he had a huge game.
Potential MVP.
It didn't even feel like he had a big fantasy game, right? Like it just felt like he had a normal game. So,
yeah, true.
Yeah, any comment on him or any comment on any other guys in the top 5? Watson, Mahomes, Carr, or Newton? You talked about Goff a little bit.
Watson really impressed me. I think he impressed everybody. I didn't think, because he's been struggling the last couple of weeks, and he did face a not so good Miami defense, granted, but he really showed what he's capable of.
I want to talk about Cam Newton for a moment, because he's been very up and down in his career in terms of fantasy football. His consistency, get this, you ready for these numbers?
My body is ready.
These are his fantasy output numbers through the whole season. He started off with 18, and then it went 33, 33, 20, 27, 29, 32. Those are pretty good numbers. He's being consistent.
It sounds like you're doing the number code from Black Ops Story
And
mode.
you know who he plays this week? Tampa Bay. So, should be another big game for Cameron Newton. Want to move on to running backs?
Absolutely.
All right. So, I'll name you the top 5, and you talk about...
Can I say my stud first?
Yeah, but I think... Let me name the top 5, because it's going to be in here.
You probably already know.
So here's the top 5. Connor, 37. Gurley, 32. Peterson, 30. Marlon Mack, 29.9. Mixon, 29.3. Go ahead.
Well, I have 2 studs because they're both on my fantasy team.
Mack and Peterson.
Well, actually, I did Marlon Mack, but that was another team. I forgot about him. But Peterson and Connor were on my team that won me money.
Oh, nice. So you were definitely happy as you got 2 out of the 3 big running backs.
And we should really talk about Connor into detail, because he's kind of looking maybe at his last game as a starter, possibly.
Yeah. It's definitely possible. So 37 fantasy points. He led all running backs. He paced the position. That is now 3 games for James Conner over 30, and he was close in the game against Cincinnati where he had 29 fantasy points. He's been averaging over 110 yards, over 2 touchdowns. 2 touchdowns or more a game for the last 3 games. So what do you think? If you have James Conner on your season-long team, what do you do? Do you try and trade him?
Not yet. I'll tell you why. Because Le'Veon Bell has been known for saying...
Trade him now.
Can you let me finish?
Go ahead.
I'm saying Le'Veon Bell has said, I'm going to be back after the bye week. Wasn't going to show up. I'll be back this week. Hasn't showed up. He still hasn't shown up yet. And until he shows up, I'm holding on to Connor. As soon as Le'Veon Bell checks in to the Steelers, to the Steelers,
will be tomorrow.
If he doesn't do that,
No, he will.
But if he doesn't, keep him. Obviously,
trade him today.
But
trade him to the guy that has Le'Veon Bell.
He's still playing so well that he's going to get some snaps still.
Trade him to the guy who owns Le'Veon Bell.
Connor isn't playing so well. Why would you just leave him on the bench?
Don't.
Would the Steelers trade him at the deadline if Le'Veon Bell checks in?
No, they would trade Le'Veon Bell if they were going to trade one of them, but they say they're not going to trade either one. No one's going to trade for Le'Veon Bell.
So they're gonna even out the snaps because Le'Veon Bell he hasn't played in 8 weeks.
But if they even out the snaps, you don't want him. You don't want Connor. You don't want Le'Veon, right?
But you're okay. So you're saying Le'Veon? You can trade Le'Veon too now.
Right. So if you have somebody in your league who's carried Le'Veon Bell for this long,
which I'm guarantee you someone has.
I'm sure he's desperate to add James Conner for the event that Connor, if Bell comes back and gets hurt. But
why would you have both running backs on this one team? You don't want the same two guys that share the same position on one team.
Right, you have to be realistic to what you're going to get back. You can't trade James Conner for a top shelf running back or wide receiver. You're going to have to get back like a decent player who's like more of a depth player. You have to be, if you think that you're going to get like Mike Evans or Alshon Jeffrey for James Conner, you're highly mistaken. So you have to be reasonable.
You might be able to get like Marlon Mack. Who's been playing very well.
If you can get Marlon Mack, I would have done that trade yesterday. Absolutely. I would do that all day because Marlon Mack's the number one running back in Indianapolis, and he's on a good offense. You know that. Connor might get buried. Like, there might be games where Connor gets 5-6 touches. That's what you got to be worried about.
But we still have no idea.
Well, we have a pretty good idea. When Le'Veon Bell comes back, maybe the first game or two, it'll be...
he comes back.
No, he's coming back. He's not...
You said that after the bye week.
Jeff. He wants to be a free agent. If he doesn't come back, he won't be a free agent. He'll have to play another season.
I thought it was week 11.
Technically by week 10.
So
we're in week 9.
Has another week.
Well, we're in week 9. So
he could easily miss this week again.
Okay, but regardless, you know that as you approach the end of fantasy football season and the fantasy football players, James Conner might be useless in 2 to 3 weeks from now. So
maybe.
Get what you can get for him. It's a stock that is losing value by the day, and you need to trade him now before he comes useless.
I'm serious about this. When Le'Veon comes back, do you start him because he's been gone for 8 weeks?
So you wouldn't start him?
No. He's been gone for 8 weeks. He's obviously rusty. Maybe he's done some training. We don't know because we've seen him in nightclubs. We haven't seen him doing practice or anything like that.
I wouldn't start either one of them.
You wouldn't even start either one of them. All right, if you're the Pittsburgh Steelers...
I'd be way too worried. If I had Connor... Let's put it this way. If I have Connor and I know that it's Le'Veon's first game, I probably still play Connor as a flex player, thinking he'll probably get 50% of the snaps. So I'm okay with that as a flex option, okay? But I'm not playing Le'Veon Bell his first game back for sure.
No, of course not. But let's put it this way. If you're the Pittsburgh Steelers, what do you do?
I mean, you have to play Le'Veon to get him back in the fold. I mean, yes, Connor is good, but Le'Veon Bell is still Le'Veon Bell.
He's still 8 weeks is a long time, and
I realize that, but you got to get him up to speed, right? He's got to get game action. Maybe not half the snaps, but maybe 40% for the first game.
I would still give 15 touches to Connor.
But here's the thing too: is that we also have to realize that Le'Veon Bell, he's familiar with the playbook, so it's not like he has to learn a lot of things. He can just come in, but it's all about his conditioning. It
is a different offense coordinator, though.
It is, but they run the same offense. He'll be fine. He's a running back. It's an easy transition for him. But yeah, I mean, we'll move on. But
if you have either Connor or Bell, it's a very tough decision.
I say you trade him to the Bell owner, because then the Bell owner is like, okay, cool. So if Le'Veon Bell gets hurt or whatever, I still have James Conner, and then I'm willing to part ways with a decent flex player for him. Whatever. Okay. So let's move on to the stud wide receivers. You ready for these? I'm going to list off the top 5 receivers of yesterday. Mike Evans, 30 points. Marvin Jones, 29. Sammy Watkins, 28. Tyler Boyd, 26. Stephon Diggs, 24.9. And just outside is Larry Fitzgerald, who had a breakout game, 24 points. So, what do you want to talk about any of these players in particular?
Definitely Marvin Jones. Because he's
game.
He's not a guy that consistently gets all these points. He's
No,
a guy that
by far his best game of the season.
he's incredibly inconsistent.
Incredibly. I
And
agree.
this game, for anyone that has him as like a flex player, which he is most likely your flex player, he's not like one of your
You
one
were
or two.
rewarded big time.
Big time. And
Big time.
you are gifted this beautiful gift of Marvin Jones touchdown bombs by Stafford.
I thought about picking him up, and I picked up Geronimo Allison instead, who had 1.9.
so. You have no credibility.
Yeah, I guess not. So, yeah, good games here. I like Tyler Boyd getting back on track. We know that he's been a really good player in the Cincinnati offense. 9 for 138. He has been a little shaky as 2 of the last 4 games he had 6 points or lower, but a nice bounce back for him. I really liked to see Larry Fitzgerald back too. Big game for Larry Fitzgerald as he finally has a breakout game in their win, the Cardinals win. So how about we take a look at the tight ends that did really well this weekend? Kelsey with 16.9. Jordan Thomas of the Texans at 16.92. So that's definitely someone to consider down the road. Jack Doyle in his return with the Colts at 16. Jared Cook 15.4. OJ Howard 14.8. Anyone stand out for you?
It was pretty much the same. It was pretty consistent with how each player does, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, Jordan Thomas, he came out of nowhere with 2 touchdowns against the Dolphins. So
yeah, but that was a different situation where Hopkins was just on a rampage and they were just double covering him and he was just open in the middle.
Yeah, and then Doyle's first game back for the Colts. So now we see the Colts. The Colts had 2 tight ends over 10 points, Doyle and Ebron. So it looks like they might have an offense that can support 2 starting caliber fantasy tight ends.
And that's great. Absolutely. And that's dangerous for defenses because when you have 1 tight end, it's hard to cover. But when you have 2...
The Colts offense is looking pretty good for fantasy if you consider they do a lot of double tight ends and they have a running back now that's been playing really well. They're very versatile. So, OJ Howard also, 14.8. He's been playing pretty well lately. That's 3 games of 9 or more points. That's 5 games over 9 points out of 8. So, out of 7, excuse me. So nice for him. How about we talk about some defenses that stood out? You ready for those? Not a big defense week in fantasy football. The highest scoring defense was the Redskins and the Bengals. They tied at 16.
And the Bengals still gave up 30-plus points.
Yeah, they had a pick 6, though it always helps. Redskins, they do damage too. The Saints have a pick 6, so they have 15. Seattle. And then the Cardinals and the 49ers both had 11 points each, so...
The reason the 49ers got 11 points was that 1 safety.
Yeah, so what do you think, what do you take away from this? Anyone stand out? The Saints have to stand out, right?
Oh, absolutely, because they've always been struggling, and when they actually have positive points, it's got to look at it at the most positive standpoint.
Yeah, so not a big week for defenses for sure. Sometimes we see teams get over 20, but 16 was the benchmark this week. So we're going to take a quick break. When me and Jeff return, we will talk about the duds. What players ruined your fantasy weeks? What players killed your chances for wins? And what players should you be concerned about?
There were a lot of them.
All right, so we'll be back right after this.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines, they got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back to the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast. We just finished talking about our studs of the week. Now we're going to the more fun duds of the week.
Yep,
and you have some lists.
I will tell you the bottom four, my four duds of the week at the quarterback position. I'm going to wear this one, as I told people on our Friday podcast that Jameis Winston would be a good start. Well, he was not a good start. 10 fantasy points. He got benched by for Fitzpatrick. I think the show is over for Winston in Tampa Bay. I know that a lot of people had been riding that Winston wave. 38 points and then 20 last week, and then to put up a 10 against Cincinnati. Some terrible interceptions. He's my dud of the week. Another quarterback that had a dud performance, but his team won, which is really weird, Jeff, is Drew Brees. 8.8 fantasy points. He only had 120 yards and one touchdown. That's it. And one pick, so...
That 120 yards passing in a game is borderline. That's a half. That's a quarter.
Yeah. So, the Saints won.
Game,
they controlled the game, but it wasn't a passing game for sure for them. How about Joe Flacco? 11 fantasy points, a dud performance. But one that really stands out to me, Jeff, and you might disagree with this, but I'm going to say Aaron Rodgers had a dud game. He only had 17 points against the Rams. He is now the 11th ranked quarterback in the NFL at fantasy football. 11.
It's disappointing to be for sure, but I still think the fact is keep him on your team. He's not like
tasty matchup this week for Aaron Rodgers.
That's what I was about to
at
say.
New England.
Yeah,
that'll be a good game, huh? Fun game. Should be a lot of points. So what about Flacco? He had a dud. What do you make of that? He's coming off a 23-point game. He has 11 against Carolina, 2 picks, 1 TD, 190 yards passing.
Anytime you're under 200 yards, it's a bad game for a quarterback.
So, Breeze, are you concerned about him at all?
Not at all. Not of the slightest.
Are you concerned with Aaron Rodgers, though? I think that's actually an honest question.
The team around him is bad. His best guy, Randall Cobb, is always hurt. He's in and out of the lineup a bunch, and he just doesn't have any go-to receivers. He's playing with a bunch of backups.
So Aaron Rodgers now has more games with 1 touchdown pass than he does with 3. So
that's unusual for him.
Exactly. So he is. I think he's consistent in the conversation as he has a really high floor. I mean, his floor is very high. His lowest output was, in fact,
You mean his ceiling?
No, his floor. His floor is very high. Like, the lowest that he will get is very high. 16 points is the lowest he's gotten. His ceiling, though, I think is capped a little bit. He has 3 games of 30 or more, but 34 is his highest, and that's a really good game. But we haven't seen a game where he throws for 4 touchdown passes. Maybe that'll be this week against New England, but it feels like the Packers have been scoring more on the ground when they get close to the goal line. So
yeah.
Why don't we talk about some dud running backs? Is that what you want to do?
Yay!
How about we start off with somebody who is a dud pretty much every single week until he's a stud, and that's Crowell. Isaiah Crowell, 4 fantasy points, Jeff. He now has, I'm going to read you his stats, okay? 26, 4, 18, 1, 34, 6, 5, 4. What do you do with this guy? What do you do with Isaiah Crowell?
See, he had that 219-yard game. It's so difficult to get rid of a guy with that one game.
Their offense is trending down for sure.
It is the Jets.
I say I'm not gonna lie. I think we talked about this before. He was a guy that I told people they should sell high on because that wasn't gonna last, you know. But now it's too late. You can't trade him now. His value is too low, and that's what happens when you hold on to these guys for too long. Mm-hmm. You knew Crowell was not that good of an NFL football player. You knew he has about 2 to 3 runs this year that make people think, oh my God, he's actually good. He's not that good. But now your chance to trade him is gone. So if you could have done it, I'm sorry, but he will now sit on your bench. How about another dud? You ready?
Yay.
Matt Breida, 4 fantasy points, 16 carries. He actually got a full load of carries. He did not get any receptions. That's now 3 games in a row for Matt Breida without a reception. He was under 5 points for the second game in a row. What do you make about him?
Well, disappointing is a strong word.
You think it's a strong word? I think it's nice.
Well, yeah, nice. But I'm saying it's a strong word just for anybody. But I'm saying for him, it's about right.
So what do you do with them? They play Oakland and the Giants next 2 games. You got to keep playing them, right?
Yeah. I mean, what else are you going to get? Like, who's left in the waiver pool that you can replace him with?
Well, we will talk about that later, won't we? So, how about Chris Thompson? He has been a dud because of injury, but he had 3 fantasy points yesterday. He only had 2 receptions, and in fact, Adrian Peterson had the biggest reception out of the backfield for them yesterday as he scored on a pass. What do you think about Chris Thompson, Jeff?
He's losing his spot to Adrian Peterson, that's for sure.
Yeah, he has now only 3 receptions yesterday. I don't know. Like, he just seems like a player. He might find himself on the waiver wire, to be honest with you. Even though he's 81% owned in ESPN fantasy leagues, his numbers have been just tanking.
Well, his counterpart's doing just so much better.
Yes.
That's the thing.
How about we talk about Doug Martin? Doug Martin was a popular waiver ad this week because of the injury to Marshawn Lynch. 13 carries, 72 yards. He caught a couple passes. His game was decent. You know, he had 7.9, but he did fumble. What do you think about Doug Martin? I have him as a dud for this week, honestly, just because I figured he'd have a little bit more output than that. I thought
just based on the team he's playing against?
Yeah, he's playing against the Colts, and he's the number 1 running back, so he got the ball up, but he did fumble. He did not score. 7.9.
Well, I wouldn't expect a lot from him because he hasn't really done much since his, 2012 campaign.
It's been a while, yep.
So I'm just always skeptical of guys who've done well one good season and then basically fall off the face of the earth. And then once he's on a new team, it's like, oh, he can be that guy again. But in reality, can he?
Yeah. So let's talk about wide receiver duds. You ready?
Yay.
How about we start off with Emmanuel Sanders, 7 fantasy points. Juju Smith-Schuster, 5 fantasy points.
Thanks, by the way.
T.Y. Hilton, 3.9. That's a really bad dud. And Doug Baldwin, 3.6. Those are my 4 duds.
Juju is the most surprising dud.
Yeah, so...
Because he's usually, in the 15-point range.
He had 4 catches for 33 yesterday. Antonio Brown was clearly the favorite target for Big Ben yesterday. But what do you make of Emmanuel Sanders? He didn't have a good game. He's been killing it lately. Coming off a 30-point fantasy game, he did have a touchdown pass in that game, so that was kind of weird. But against Kansas City, 7 fantasy points against a plus matchup there. As the Kansas City defense, although improved a little bit, still can't stop the pass that well. I'm a little surprised to see that low of a score for somebody like Emmanuel Sanders. You did talk about Juju. What about T.Y. Hilton, though, Jeff? What did you think of his dud yesterday? 1 catch for 34 yards. That's it.
1 catch for your number 1 receiver is bad. That's all I'm going to say about it.
You know, he only has 1 game this year over over 6 catches. He has 1 for 7. He has 2 for 5, 2 for 4, and 1 for 1. So maybe his wide receiver 1 value is a bit overstated, or wide receiver 2. Do you see him more as a flex player at this point?
More of a bench player.
So 13, 17, 7, 15, and then he had the 2 games where he missed.
Would you be surprised to see him on the bench on some teams?
Yeah, I think he's a guy that you could try and get for cheap. I think there's value there in terms of a trade. So we'll see. Doug Baldwin, though, I want to talk about him because he was a player that I told our listeners to look for to try and play this weekend because he had a really good matchup against Detroit. As we know, Detroit, Darius Slay is their best cornerback, but he hardly ever goes into the slot. It really was setting up this game for Doug Baldwin to be really good. and Tyler Lockett to be the one suffering, but it was actually the opposite. Tyler Lockett, he has the better game. He has a good game again. Doug Baldwin, 2 for 26. What do you think about that?
Disappointing again, like we said before, but like he's usually the guy Russell Wilson loves to go to the most in like crunch time situations, and he was almost non-existent in this game.
Big time non-existent. We're going to go to tight ends. David Njoku. He played yesterday, but he did not register a single catch. Jeff, what do you take from this tight end who his last 3 games he had 6 catches, 7, 4. He scored a touchdown on 2 of those 3, at least 10 fantasy points in all 3 of these games. 0. Throws up the bagel yesterday. Talk to me about it.
Well, I do like bagels.
So talk to me about when one of your fantasy players gets you a bagel.
I want to eat that bagel and spit in his face.
So he...
Anytime of my fantasy player, any fantasy player gets a bagel, he should not be on your starters. He should be in your
Njoku's
bench.
been really good, though. I mean, he's one of the best tight ends. Tight end's a very shallow position.
Yes, but getting a bagel, like, at least sometimes the guy gets 1 reception or something. Like,
So yesterday, another dud was Trey Burton. 3 catches, 18 yards. He had 25 fantasy points against the Patriots the week before. Yesterday, 3 points. So that's a dud.
well, his whole season's been inconsistent. He's never had, like, back-to-back.
He's been coming on strong, though. And
Yeah, granted. But the fact of the matter is, like, he's still, to me, he's not like, he's a guy you would have if your tight end was on a bye week.
For Burton?
Yeah.
Really? You don't think he's a starter?
Yeah, I just feel like there's someone else.
I mean,
out
he's
there
a number
that can
6. He's a number 6 tight end in fantasy.
Yeah, but that was just based off like a couple of great games against New England.
Yep. But, I mean, he's had 3 games over 10 points other than the New England game. He has 4 touchdown catches on the season. I mean, I see what you're saying. It's just not a deep position, though. He's a number 6 tight end. So, how about C.J. Uzoma, the tight end for Cincinnati?
See, I would put
Another bagel.
for him. That was unusual because Dalton likes to throw to him.
Yeah, he's coming off 2 games where he had at least 8 fantasy points. He hasn't had a game over 9, but he's been consistently in that 5 to 8 range.
He's been in like the red zone type of plays.
So he's a dud. And then we'll move on to defenses real quick. Some defense duds. The Ravens. Wow. Okay, so I knew they had a tough matchup, but Cam Newton had been the worst quarterback in the NFL against the blitz, and the Ravens blitz more than any team. Ravens put up a -3. What did you think about that?
Surprising. Like I knew like we talked about this. The Panthers are a very quiet 5-2, but to really rout the Ravens defense like that really showed like, is this just a good run the Ravens are having, or is this a sign of things to come? Like, is this a downhill spin for them?
So next week they host Pittsburgh.
That is going to be the tail-all game. And
So would you feel confident starting them? Because they usually do pretty well against Big Ben. They usually rattle him a little bit. Big Ben, he takes sacks. He gets a lot of hits. Would you feel confident starting the Ravens in that game?
God, that's like a coin flip, isn't it?
It's tough.
It's really tough because they are the number 1 defense.
Check
in
out our
yards.
show on Friday, and we'll talk about our start and
nice
sit.
plug. Oh, bravo. Hold on. Bravo.
I have another defense that threw up a huge dud. The Dolphins, of course. That was the Thursday night game.
They are known for their duds.
Yeah, but they're a decent defense. They were top 12 before
Minka
this week.
Fitzpatrick is playing really well, but you can only do so much as a safety and corner.
Another dud was the Detroit Lions, 0 points.
Are you surprised by that?
I am, because the Seahawks offense gives up sacks and they don't score a lot of points. So to see them...
The Lions have been on a major downhill spin lately. That's why I'm hesitant about them, just overall as a team.
I just am surprised they didn't register a few sacks, maybe a turnover. So, that's our duds for the week. So, let's take a break, Jeff. When we come back, I hope Jeff is ready because I'm ready. I have some fantasy.
I'm always
I have
ready.
some waiver wire ads for the people. I am a man of the people. I don't know if Jeff is a man of the people, but I am a man of the people. I want everybody who listens to succeed in their fantasy leagues. These men might be able to take you over the top.
What are you implying there?
I'm implying that I just hope you're ready. We're going to do that when we come back, waiver wire ads.
Check out the show that's built on the MMA, from the UFC to extreme cage fighting. They got the fights covered. Check out the GSMC MMA podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMCpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
And welcome back to the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast. We just talked about our studs and duds, and now we're going on to the waiver wire of this week. And do you have a lot going on with this waiver wire, or do you want me to go first?
Do I have a lot going on with it?
Do you have any people in mind you want to talk about?
Yes.
Oh, wait, can I guess it first?
Go ahead.
Is it Fitzmagic?
He's on my list. I mean, I'll start with him.
He's on my list also.
I'm not going to start there, though. I have a different one. Kiki Kuti from Houston, I think, is a top waiver wire pick as he is recovering from a hamstring injury. We've seen him have two really good games with Houston. Will Fuller's out for the season, torn ACL. So,
that hurts.
DeAndre Hopkins, but Kuti has the ability to be the second best fantasy football player on that team. He's had games where he's had 11 catches for 100 yards, 6 for 51 and a touchdown. He's a dynamic player, and I think he's available as he's only 19% owned in ESPN, so he should be owned in 100% after this week.
Okay, I can see that. Another person I think should be definitely I'll go with this. Devontae Booker, running back for Denver. 4% owned, but he is looking to he's a rare owner, obviously, but he gets the nod because the injured Royce Freeman over the weekend. And Phillip Lindsay is getting a lot of those touches, granted, but he's going to get some touches himself.
Yeah.
He's moved up to the number 2 running back, and Denver runs the ball a lot. And Lindsey can't do it all on his own, and I think Booker is going to get more of those touches, and it's his chance to really break out. If you really need someone for a flex player, I think Booker will be the way to go.
He is risky, but it is a position that is just not very deep right now. There's not a lot of running backs that are sitting out there that haven't been taken already. We haven't seen too many injuries to starters, so there hasn't been a lot of opportunity for these other guys to go ahead and be a top waiver wire ad. I'll go ahead and say Fitzpatrick. I know that you just mentioned him, but I'll just go ahead and
say the one you like.
Fitzmagic. So I think Fitzmagic. So we don't know yet if he will be the starter. The Bucks haven't announced it, but I would pick him up and put him on my bench because, I mean, honestly, he's just a guy that you want him on your team, especially if he gets the nod. So, I mean, we all saw what Fitzpatrick did in the first few weeks that he started. He had 50 points, 37, 31. He plays a little over a quarter yesterday and gets 23. He's had one bad half. I would definitely pick up Fitzpatrick. He has a tough matchup against Carolina, Washington is next too, but Giants and 49ers in week 11 and 12, so he would be a top pickup for me. Who's next on your list?
Well, it is also Ryan Fitzpatrick.
Okay.
Because just the fact that he almost brought the Buccaneers to a full comeback like we were talking about against Cincinnati. And, they can win with him. They can just flat out win with him.
They can score points, that's for sure. So
he's had multiple 400-yard games this season, and he had one bad half that benched him for the starting quarterback. It's like you were talking about this. It's like based off the fact that one's the number 1 overall pick and one's a 7th round pick. that's been a journeyman ever since, you're going to go with the number 1 overall pick because you put all that faith into him. But now he's not giving you that back. You got to go with Fitzpatrick, the guy that's been playing very well for his age, and his consistency is right now. He's probably going you probably can rely on him for 300-yard games, multiple 300-yard games.
Yeah. So next, I actually want to stay with quarterbacks here. He is owned in a lot of leagues, 85%. So this isn't a player that's going to be available in every one of your leagues out there. But if Russell Wilson is still available, pick him up just because he has now 3 touchdown passes in 3 consecutive games, at least 26 fantasy points.
How much percent is he owned? Do you know?
He's 85, that's why I said he's not, but he is out there in 15%. So if he's out there, go get him, He's not somebody who's widely available, but he's also somebody who's not a slam dunk on every roster. So I would say pick him up as he is showing a lot of consistency. Who's the next player on your list?
Well, I was thinking about this, and I said this last week, and he didn't do that well, but I'll say it again, Josh Reynolds.
Okay.
From L.A.
But what if Cooper Kupp is back?
He's still doubtful.
Yeah, but what if Kupp is back for this week?
If he's back, then I'm not entirely sure. But if Coop is not back, then you got to give him another chance because this is going to be his last shot. And he's got to take full advantage of it.
Gotcha. My popular player I think will be picked up this week is Devontae Parker for me. He had 6 catches, 134 yards against Houston. He had a really good game, and the Dolphins don't have a lot of wide receivers at this point with all the injuries. So even if Kenny Stills comes back, you're still looking at Jakeem Grant, Danny Amendola, and Devontae Parker. Amendola is a good slot receiver, but they really don't have an outside threat other than Stills. So I like Devontae Parker getting back. He was in the doghouse for a while. Plus, Jeff, there is a possibility that Devontae Parker could be traded by tomorrow's deadline to a team looking to add a wide receiver who has fallen out of favor with the current coaching staff, which is Devontae Parker. He had been a healthy scratch for a few games, and then he has that blow-up game last week. So I think he's an interesting ad because there's a lot of upside there.
All right, well, I'm also going to stick with wide receiver, and I'll let you consider this, but Pierre Garçon. Because if the trade rumors are true, and he goes to a playoff contending team, they're not just going to trade him just to have him. They're going to use him as best they can, and he can explode. Yes, he has some shoulder and knee problems, but overall, I see him. If he does get traded from the 49ers, he's going to be a vital part.
Does he have
offense.
a lot of upside though? Like, does he have? Like, to me, he's kind of like a Larry Fitzgerald. Like, he's just like a possession guy, but he doesn't really carry like a lot of. Like, what's his upside?
I'll let you compare. Like, his upside is if he goes to a playoff contending team that needs a receiver, he's going to be their 1 or 2.
I mean, I can't think of any team that he'd go to where he'd be their 1.
There's multiple. Well, I'm saying he can't. If the 1 is out, he can be moved up to that spot. But there are multiple teams that are interested in him, and right now the trade deadline is for playoff teams that need an extra boost. And if any playoff team wants Garçon, they want him for a particular reason, and I'm interested to see what they can do with him, and that's why I'm saying you can pick him up as a flex player or as a bench player just to see what that trade, if that trade happens, what he can do.
Mm-hmm. For me, a guy who's only 10% owned is DJ Moore, the rookie for the Carolina Panthers. He had a 15-point game yesterday, 5 catches, 90 yards. He also had 2 carries for 39 yards. He's a dynamic player. He's probably the best athlete on the Carolina Panthers. And they don't really have an outside threat, especially a vertical threat. They have Funches, who's a good receiver, big-bodied receiver. McCaffrey, of course, to run the ball and catch passes out of the backfield. But I think DJ Moore is an interesting player. His role has been getting bigger and bigger for the Panthers. So he is an interesting ad. Who's next on your list?
It's a tight end, and this one's still iffy to me. I'm not entirely confident in this one, but what I'm going with is Cameron Brate. I know he's not taken up a lot, and I know he's been struggling, But with Fitzpatrick, he might come out of that shell he's been in. Because I know he was dropped a lot recently.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're in the waivers, why not take a chance with him with Fitzpatrick coming back? Because he's going to be starting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that was my last waiver wire pick.
I have one last one, and this is definitely a lottery ticket. I don't think that this is the best pickup, but if you have the luxury of not having too many guys on buys this week and you want to take a chance on somebody, Josh Adams, Philadelphia Eagles. You know how many people own him? Less than half of 1%.
Another Josh Allen, by the way.
No, Josh Adams.
Oh, I thought you said Adams. Sorry.
No, I did say Adams.
I mean, okay, it's been a long weekend.
As
you were saying.
He's less than a 0.5% owned.
How do you be 0.5%? So half a person has him?
No, just he doesn't have enough people to be 1% or even 0.5%.
That's absurd.
He led the Eagles in carries and yards yesterday. They have Clement and Wendell Smallwood, neither one of which has really taken the job by the scruff of the neck. Well, what about Josh Adams? Nine carries for 61 yards. He had one reception for 6 yards. He is an interesting player. He was splitting time with him, Smallwood, and Clement. We saw Clement get 4 touches yesterday. Are you following with me?
I'm following.
Wendell Smallwood got 8. Corey Clement got 4. Adams led the backfield with 10 touches. So I think that it's a shot in the dark. If you're looking for a boom or bust type of play, maybe you pick him up. If he doesn't do much next game, you just drop him. He is on a bye week, though, so you can wait, possibly, until next week. But don't forget about him. Just remember that against Jacksonville, he looked very impressive.
Yeah, I'm going to agree. Like, what do you got to lose in that situation?
Yeah. So I think we should take a quick break, and we come back. We'll talk about some news and notes around the NFL that can affect your fantasy team, including news out of Cleveland that we just got word this hour. So
Cleveland. Oh, Cleveland, what have you become?
yes, we will do that right after this.
Check out the show built around the women of MMA. From the UFC to the extreme cage fighting, we got the fights covered.
Listen.
It's the Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast. The latest news of upcoming fights, discussions of previous matches. Join us as we talk to and about the biggest names in women's mixed martial arts, past, present, and future. When it's the women's fight game, you know where to listen to. The Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast.
And welcome back to the final segment of the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast. We just finished talking about our waiver wire pickups. Now we're going to go to other news that revolves around your fantasy team, such as Todd Haley has been fired as the offensive coordinator from the Cleveland Browns.
And Hugh Jackson.
Well, I was going to say, not an hour afterwards of Hugh Jackson's firing. So we have two key components in the Cleveland's, downfall, gone, and now things are looking up in Cleveland, so maybe you should pick up some Cleveland players.
Yeah, we saw David Njoku get 0 catches yesterday. Maybe he's a guy that somebody will be upset about and just drop him, and then you should jump all over that. So,
and if you have the Cleveland defense, you should be still starting them, but keep them. They're still they're still one of the best defenses in the league. It just their offense doesn't help them.
Mm-hmm.
Now, hopefully, their new offense, whoever the offensive coordinator and head coach will be, will help them in the long run.
Yeah. So the Browns, they're all over the place right now. But with Baker Mayfield, it looks like they have a competent quarterback. So I'm not sure at this point who's going to be taking over the offensive play calling duties for the Browns or who's going to be coaching the team. But it is something to consider. It is a team to consider in terms of trying to get players that maybe their value will increase. But how about Tyreek Hill? Tyreek Hill hurt his groin yesterday, strained groin. It sounds like he might have been able to go back in the game, but we're talking about a groin injury for a man who relies a lot on his speed. Are you concerned about Tyreek Hill, and would you consider picking up someone else?
No, you got to keep Tyreek Hill.
I mean, you got to keep him, but are you trying to pick somebody else up? Or...
Oh, no, I'm still trusting Tyreek Hill with everything I have.
Gotcha. So you think he'll play this week?
Yeah.
Okay. So how about another...
But he may be limited. I'll say that. He may be limited.
So how about another player who didn't play due to a groin injury this week? Allen Robinson.
Allen Robinson. Allen. Would you put him as worried?
He hasn't been performing very much in fantasy. That's for sure. He's been a dud. So, are you worried about him? I actually moved on from him this last week. I had him in a league, and I just outright dropped him. He just hasn't been producing.
He has been struggling, to say the least. Mm-hmm. And I would agree with the fact that maybe you shouldn't rely on him as he was when you first drafted. You probably thought of him as a 1 or 2 receiver, one of your top receivers. No.
Yeah, I drafted him for sure to be my second receiver.
Yeah, and bottom line is he's not performing that way at all. He's barely performing how a flex player would. There's
a player that's out there that's available in 75% of leagues who has injury news. We didn't talk about him as a waiver ad, but it's somebody you should keep an eye on, and that's Jamison Crowder. He's been out with the ankle injury the last few games, but here are his next 2 opponents, Jeff. So if he comes back and he can play, he gets Atlanta and Tampa Bay. That's about as good as an outlook as you can have for a receiver for fantasy. So look to add him if he can come back healthy. Again, he's available in about 75% of leagues out there.
Yes, true. Definitely something to look at. There's just, with all the stuff that's been happening last couple of weeks, especially this last couple of days, there's a lot of different things you got to look at.
Another groin injury, Kenny Stills. Another groin injury to a wide receiver. So Kenny Stills, he's available in about half of leagues.
He was dropped early in the season for most people.
Mm-hmm. So they say that he has a shot to play in Week 9. But again, we just talked about Devontae Parker. Add Devontae Parker if Stills can't play. I think he's a good play this week. The Jets don't cover receivers all that great. They're a good defense.
Devontae Parker has had some breakout games, and it wouldn't be surprised if he does again.
Yeah. So, interesting little tidbit there. One defense that I wanted to talk to you about that I feel is a really good play this week. They are available in a lot of different leagues, as they're only 22% owned. They did just come off getting destroyed, and their defense got dominated. But that's the Miami Dolphins, Jeff. And the reason why I say that,
Miami,
is because they play at home against the Jets, and the Jets have really been struggling on the offensive end. So
that's the Jets.
Crowell, Darnold, they haven't had a lot going on. Robbie Anderson's been hurt.
Would you waste a spot for a new defense? Would you get rid of your other defense?
I carry 2 defenses all the time if I'm just playing a matchup that week. Like, for example, I played the 49ers over the Vikings this week, and it worked out for me. I got an extra 8 points, which is crucial to winning the game. So, yeah, I like streaming defenses for sure. So, there could be some value there because that's a defense that's people. If Miami's defense is on a roster, they're definitely getting dropped because people are pissed about what happened to them last week. But it is interesting. You also need to consider that in Week 9, the Bears defense is pretty much owned by everybody, but they have such a good matchup against Buffalo. Let's see, another defense that you can consider. I mean, you could even consider picking up the Jets defense against Miami. That's another play. How about the Cowboys defense against the Tennessee Titans. 13% owned. The Cowboys can rush the passer. They've had positive defensive points in every game, 3 over 15, or 3 over 12, excuse me. That's a team coming off a bye, playing an offense that hasn't been good. So you can definitely play the Cowboys this week if you're looking for a streaming option.
A nice little surprise.
Yeah, and looking ahead to Week 10, because what I like to do is set up my defenses for multiple weeks in advance. Week 10, the Jets play Buffalo, so you can pick up the Jets this week and either sit them or play them against Miami, but then you can also play them against Buffalo the following week. And you want to play defense against Buffalo. I don't care if it's Josh Allen, Peterman, Anderson. It doesn't matter.
Pick your easy poison.
It doesn't matter. You
well,
want
except
them
for
all.
Josh Allen has had some good games, but if you have Peterman or Anderson, you're going to be loving that defensive matchup.
So anyways, I think that's all we got for news and notes around the NFL. You want to add anything until so we can part ways here, Jeff, and come back Friday where we pick our teams and do it all over again?
Well, I just have to say it's good to be back. It's good to be back in the world of the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast. Make sure you tune into other podcasts such as football and sports that happened today. And like always, we will see you on Friday for our picks
Fantasy football
podcast.
We'll
And
do
we
the
have our
stardom
picks.
sit-ems.
Yep, stardom sit-ems. We have our own little fantasy football wagers happening also. And that is happening Friday, and we hope to see you, and just hear from you again. Thank you, and good night, everybody.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. From movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.